pretty much doing it anyway. You're muting yourselves when you're not speaking. That's great. Can I ask you to turn your cameras off as well, please? Unless you're going to speak and contribute, and I hope some of you will later on. That will just hopefully give us a bit more reliability with the meeting. There will be an opportunity for discussions and for questions, and we'll do that at the end of our presentations. We've probably got about an hour's worth of presentation, and then we'll go into a plenary session. Can I ask, if you have questions, use the chat facility. That will allow those questions to come in and to be collated, or you can use the email through Kat Thompson as well, Katrina Thompson, if you have a question. So there's a couple of ways in which you can get your question into the mix. When we do get to the plenary session, and I'll remind you at that time as well, could I ask you that you use your little yellow hand to indicate that you want to come in, and when you do, please turn your camera on. So hopefully that is all clear enough. And then finally, I should perhaps just say too, the recording of the event will be uploaded to the SIPR page, to the Scottish Institute of Policing Research page. And now we'll just finish our introductions, if you like, before getting into the content. And firstly, it's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Megan ONeill from SIPR. Megan, can I hand over to you?
Yes, thank you, John. That's great. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today on our event about public confidence in policing. I'm, as ACC Hawkins said, I'm Megan ONeill. I'm a reader in the School of Social Sciences at the University of Dundee. And in terms of today, I'm here as one of the associate directors of the Scottish Institute for Policing Research. So as part of SIPR, I lead the Police Community Relations Network. So SIPR is a collaboration between 14 of Scotland's universities, Police Scotland, and the Scottish Police Authority. And our goal is to find ways to help meet the challenges of 21st century policing through evidence-based research. So connecting the police with researchers to make sure that their practice is in the best position possible for the challenges of the 21st century. So I'm delighted to be co-hosting and co-sponsoring this grant today with Police Scotland and the Scottish Police Authority. So we're very, very keen to help facilitate knowledge exchange and research between researchers, members of the third sector, also private sector, and the police, so that we can help policing to be as responsive as possible to all the needs of Scotland's publics. So thank you all so much for coming. You'll hear again from me a bit later on about the actual grant call and the application process. But for now, I will hand it back over to John.
Megan, thank you very much. And can I introduce Amanda Coulthard as well, please, from the Police Authority? Amanda?
Thank you, ACC Hawkins. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm absolutely delighted on behalf of the Scottish Police Authority to be involved in this event and to be part of the welcome. The Scottish Police Authority was established at the same time as the Single Service Police Service for Scotland as an oversight and scrutiny body, and in the joint strategy for policing that was agreed in April 2020, we describe our collaborative aspiration that public communities, both geographical and interest, and partners are involved in and have confidence in policing. I think that's very clear through our SPA vision, which is policing in the public interest. I think that's what makes this opportunity for research and evidence gathering so exciting for us as an authority. We are very committed to understanding more about public confidence and public interest and making sure that the totality of the population of Scotland is able to do that. And this is a really great opportunity to identify groups that may not be heard as much as others and make sure that we're able to learn from that. So really interested to hear the discussion today and to see the bids that come in. Thank you, John.
No, thank you, Amanda. And so that's the introductions and hopefully the housekeeping covered. We'll sort of move into the event proper then. And I'm going to sort of set off by hopefully saying just a few words actually to set the scene. And it's really my focus is on just sharing how important public confidence is to us. I mean, confidence in policing has been an important consideration in policing in these islands for the best part of 200 years. You can trace it back to Sir Robert Peel and 1829, the so-called Peelian principles, and in particular the notion that the police are the public and the public are the police, which is as true today, I think, as it was back then. And that relationship is so important to us in terms of policing by consent and the whole notion of legitimacy. We achieve in policing in Scotland our legitimacy from our fellow citizens and from that relationship that we have with them. So I think it's worthy of note, perhaps not everybody on the call will be as familiar as I am with the journey of policing in Scotland, but just in case you weren't aware, Police Scotland, albeit policing in Scotland has been around for well over 100 years, Police Scotland, or the Police Service of Scotland, came into effect in March 2013. We're a relatively new organisation, albeit with a history of policing that extends way beyond that. And I think it's important, perhaps, just to look at the purpose of Police Scotland as enshrined in the statute that brought us into effect in 2012. And again, I think very helpfully, it puts the whole issue of the relationship with the public and public confidence right at the heart of what we do. And it is, in short, it says that the purpose of policing is to contribute to the safety and well-being of people, places and communities, persons, localities and communities. So it's really clear. And I think in many ways it's unusual compared to how police services are set up in certain parts of the world or their missions. You hear often about crime enforcement and so on and so forth. While that's a part of what we do, our mission is much broader in Scotland, and it is about the safety and well-being of people, places and communities. I think maybe then, just to bring us even sort of closer up to date, then it is worthy of note, I think, that when COVID hit and we sort of come into last year, our Chief Constable, Ian Livingston, was really clear in the challenge he put onto the organisation around public confidence. He, of course, wanted to ensure that we did all we could to help the health effort, but also to maintain and build confidence in policing. And you'll hear a bit about our effort over the last year, in particular, over the next hour or so. And I think in many ways, without kind of spoiling what's gonna follow, it's overwhelmingly an overarchingly positive picture, despite the challenge that we have seen and we felt as an organisation, which mirrors the challenges that communities have felt across Scotland. Over the piece, we've seen public confidence in policing rising. It's 9% higher, as you'll hear a bit more about later on, than it was the year before. But equally, it's clear that we have been less successful with certain communities. There's an opportunity for us to improve our engagement with a number of communities and also to increase levels of confidence with those communities. And that's very much what our focus is today with this event and with the fund that we have put together in order to address that issue. So as you've heard, this is a joint endeavour. Megan will tell you a little bit later on about the fund we have. It's a fund of £50,000, and what we want to do is to hear from various interested parties, actually, in terms of an application for projects to help us engage with, understand and increase the confidence of what we've described as seldom heard communities, not hard to reach communities, but seldom heard communities that we haven't been able to listen to and to hear as well as we might have. I suspect and I hope that we will get a broad range of interest. I suppose that in my own mind, it might be academic research, it might be commercial research, it might be a project from a non-profit organisation, it might be something else I haven't even considered. But I certainly hope that you will enjoy the event. I hope that you will find it interesting, and more than anything, I hope you will be motivated to answer the call, I suppose, and to help us to make improvements in this important area. So I hope that set the scene a little. I'll invite my colleague Kirsty Louise Campbell to come on screen next, and Kirsty's just going to say a few more words around our strategic intent and direction. Kirsty, can I pass over to you?
Great, thank you very much. Yes, thank you. I'm delighted to be here with so much interest in Police Scotland and the work that we're doing. I hope that it is valuable ahead of talking through in depth the research work that we've undertaken in relation to public confidence, the current insights we have and our gaps, to just look briefly at the strategic direction and why trust and confidence in policing is such a critical area for the future of policing. And also for us in the current stage in COVID, as has been referenced. The slide that's there, just to describe that a bit, just shows our strategic direction, our joint strategy for policing and our public contact and engagement strategy, which I will just talk through as part of what I'm presenting today. So before 2019, Police Scotland had what I would describe as more singular focus on our operational priorities. The first strategy for policing in Scotland was published in 2017, but we still recognise that there was still a lack of connection in some respects between the day-to-day policing that we do and the work that we've been doing, which has been quite extensive around transformation and change. So the service moved to introduce strategic outcomes for policing so that we could better describe the positive impact that we wanted our service to have for the people and communities of Scotland. That's allowed us to better represent, I think, the breadth of policing, which is delivered locally with specialist and operational support, along with the contribution of our corporate support functions and how we're evolving as an organisation through transformation. The outcomes first appeared in our annual police plan for that year, 2019, and they were developed with communities. There was a lot of testing, public engagement, and a range of key stakeholders were involved to establish their views and their support for our approach. And not surprisingly, in terms of the history of policing in Scotland, as ACC Hawkins has kind of advised, one of our strategic outcomes is very much the public, communities and partners are engaged, involved and have confidence in policing. And what that does for us is capture the principle of policing by consent, which is absolutely fundamental in terms of Scotland's social fabric. It recognises for the policing service just how important it is that we work with people, that we genuinely understand and respond to their experience and perceptions of policing, and also how to take up the valuable opportunity this provides us with to improve and enhance our services. So public confidence, the area that we're focusing on today, is linked with visibility, treating people fairly and with respect, and our wider community engagement initiatives. We know that an analysis into Scottish policing, which took place from 2012 to 2015, highlighted the need for greater public engagement so that we could continue to build on our existing community relationships and to continue to build and increase public trust and confidence. What we also know today is the huge advances in technology that are taking place all around us. Our world becomes more and more interconnected, and that creates phenomenal opportunities for new methods of communication and also for response. But future developments in technology as well need us to have a really strong, consistent and appropriate dialogue and participative approaches to work with the public so that we strike that really clear and appropriate balance between protection and human rights. We know that focus groups we carried out in 2018 revealed a lot more about public perceptions of fair treatment and respect that very much include qualities of emotional engagement, so listening without judgment, showing empathy and understanding, being open and transparent, and recognising our mistakes and when we can put those right. The insights from those focus groups, together with a significant range of wider research, also enabled us to set out the first public contact and engagement strategy for policing in Scotland. And delivering on that strategy for us is absolutely vital in terms of how people experience our services. The way we do things, how we make people feel, has a really significant impact on public propensity to contact us, approach us and cooperate with police, whether that contact is initiated by the public or by ourselves. And as an organisation whose values are around fairness, integrity, respect and human rights, we know that our focus and approach going forwards must enable the right experiences for survivors, witnesses and others, and we need to support our people to deliver this. So the public contact and engagement strategy, and I've just picked up in the chat, I will post a link to that just in a moment, does set out our aspiration to improve the reach of our public and community engagement initiatives. As a service, we're committed to continue to talk and listen to diverse communities and groups of people by continuing to both develop and undertake engagement to build, maintain and sustain good relationships. Our public confidence work to date has hugely enhanced our understanding of the drivers of public confidence as they are in the last few years and now in 2021. And Davina will set out a lot more detail around that for you shortly. But we want to do more, and we want to continue to build better relationships, be inclusive and accessible, encourage greater participation, and understand all our communities and people better. So once we've shared the insights today, we'll have an opportunity to consider some of the areas we know that we have gaps and we want to know a lot more about, do more with, and to focus on in future. And I really look forward to the discussions with you today, and then considering some of the proposals that you bring forward to support and work with us on our public confidence approach going forwards. Thank you, and I'll now hand back to the Chair, ACC Hawkins. Thank you.
Kirsty Louise, first class, thank you. And it's great to see the chat function being used. So folks, continue to do that. If you've got specific questions, specific asks, any information for the plenary, just please use the chat function to get that across to us. I'm going to pass over to Davina now, but before I do, I mean, it would be remiss of me not to pay tribute actually to the work of the Police Scotland Research and Insights team. It's clear to me that we understand the drivers and what's going on in relation to public confidence much more than we've ever done before, and it's actually because of that work we've got a greater understanding of the areas we need to improve upon. I think you'll be pretty impressed without putting the jinx on, Davina, when you hear the quality of the work. So Davina, with the big build-up, can I ask you to share with colleagues a bit of the insight in terms of public confidence, please?
Of course, I'll do my very best. Thank you for that, Chair. So good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see everyone here today. I'm Davina, and my team and I lead public engagement for Police Scotland. And as ACC Hawkins has just mentioned, over the past year, we've been very much focused on understanding public confidence and user experience of policing across a number of areas, connecting the force executive and all 13 police divisions on what really matters to communities, particularly during this challenging time, providing them with actionable data that they can use in practice and to inform communications and engagement. For the next 15 minutes, I'm going to walk you through our approaches to engagement just now, some of the emerging research evidence on public confidence, and the priorities that really stand out for us in terms of enhancing our practice within Seldom Heard communities. Next slide. So our current approaches to public and community engagement include national surveys across policing, and this includes our local police survey and user experience surveys, which I'll come on to in more detail. We also undertake service-specific consultations for informing our policy and practice. And since launching our online citizen space platform in August 2019, public engagement with our strategies and police plans has increased by over 500%, and that totals around over 100,000 responses to a number of surveys. Over the past 12 months, we have collected the most responses to date, particularly from our local police survey, which has been fantastic and just goes to show the level of public interest in policing during COVID. We've also ran a significant number of user experience surveys with people that have contacted the police. And most recently, we launched our body-worn video survey, and that's the first of an ongoing conversation that we're having with communities and the public in terms of how we use body-worn video across operational policing. So over the last 12 months in total, we've had around 65,000 responses. And again, that's we're really pleased about this, and we really want to do more in terms of particularly feeding back to the public now in terms of how we're using all of that data and feedback to improve services. We also carry out qualitative research for understanding public perception, expectations and reactions to any changes that we might be making to any of our policing services, our policy, service changes and any new technologies that we'll be introducing. So, for example, as part of developing our public contacts and engagement strategy, we carried out a series of focus group discussions with a number of communities across Scotland to understand their perceptions, expectations and reactions to using different contact methods for contacting the police in emergency and non-emergency situations. And we'll soon be undertaking some more focus groups with diverse communities, again, across different areas of Scotland, to understand public perception and acceptance of body-worn video across operational policing. And that will take place over the summer months. And we are leaning more now into approaches that enable greater public participation, local democracy methods and prioritisation planning to involve communities in more action-focused engagement. For service design, we carry out user journey mapping to understand how we can improve the lived experience of the public and people, particularly looking at the end-to-end user journeys. And connecting all the different stages of contact with, mainly for the person that's using our service, but also how we work more effectively with our stakeholders to improve their journey end to end. So the next slide summarises the surveys that we launched during COVID. So to keep communities and organisations engaged and involved with our approaches to policing the pandemic, we launched 2 national surveys at the start of April 2020. So Your Police is an online survey. It's available in other formats in British Sign Language, Easy Read and telephone. And this is an open survey so that anyone at any time can give us feedback about their local policing service. The survey covers questions around confidence and perceptions of local police, feelings of safety and public opinion on our approach to police, and particularly the pandemic at this time. There's open-ended questions, and we've got over 100,000 open-ended comments, which my team are focused on and looking at every single one and theming the results to circulate internally before we communicate externally. So we can frame actions for operational policing. The open-ended questions ask people about what concerns them and what worries them in their local areas. And we leave this fairly open and non-police related, so we can identify cross-sector themes that we can share with our local partners to provide a multi-agency response to community concerns. We also ask people to tell us what they feel the police are doing particularly well in their area and what we could be doing better. Our user experience survey is administered by an independent market research agency, and this survey interviews a sample of people who have contacted the police, whether to report a crime or another incident. Before COVID, this was a telephone survey, and that wasn't possible to do during COVID, so we had to move it quickly to a text-based survey in order to be accessible and to allow us to continue to measure how we were doing in terms of responding to public reporting, etc. The quotas were met every month across local policing. I think over the last 12 months we've had we've interviewed nearly 18,000 people over text. And these are people who all contacted the police for either emergency or a non-emergency situation. So the next slide shows the demographic breakdown of our local police survey. And your police has a total sample size of 36,604 responses, and this is by far our biggest, the biggest response to any survey Police Scotland has carried out. It includes around 300 British Sign Language responses, and the sample is broadly representative of age, region and gender. We constantly monitor the responses coming in and work closely with our colleagues in corporate comms, partnership prevention and community wellbeing, and also the partnership superintendents in all local policing areas to help us target communications efforts to areas and groups that are underrepresented in the survey. And this has included reaching out to organisations that represent the interests of LGBTQI, children and young people, people with disabilities and Black, people of colour and people who are from minority white backgrounds. The next slide shows the sample breakdown for Seldom Heard voices. Making the engagement as accessible as possible has been a top priority. Although there remains a lot of work to be done, we were able to engage with a number of Seldom Heard communities through working with internal and external partners. We responded to feedback from the deaf community and transgender community for making the survey more accessible and inclusive, and this definitely resulted in a much higher response from these communities. Of the total sample, 30% of respondents lived in the most socially deprived areas of Scotland. 12% of the sample described themselves as living with a disability. 9% were under the age of 29. Another 9% were LGBTQI community, and 1% were Black people, people of colour, and people who are from minority white backgrounds. So that 1% includes totals 336 people. So not as many people as we'd like to engage, although that does give us some useful findings.
Davina, can I interrupt you for a second? Can I just check whether everyone's lost the presentation on the screen or not at the moment?
No, I can't see it either, no.
Yeah, I've lost it.
And me. I lost it too.
I think oh, there we go. Perfect, thanks, Phil.
Thank you. Yeah, so as I was saying, we'd really like to particularly increase engagement with BAME people. The next slide summarises how we responded to the survey feedback during the pandemic. And the survey responses influenced the policing response to the pandemic in a number of ways. The public feedback was reviewed weekly at the Chief Constable's operational review meeting every Monday morning. And the monthly Strategic Leadership Board, and at the local level, confidence trackers were provided to the local police commanders for their area. Some of the actions taken based on public feedback included increasing local police presence at lockdown hotspots with a focus on patrolling during the evening and after dark. There were particular concerns to those living in rural areas around domestic tourism from Scottish regions with higher COVID rates. We also enhanced our public contact based on feedback, and this included introducing an online reporting form for COVID breaches, introducing video diary appointments and community meetings, and these offered discreet, safe and convenient ways of contact and engagement with the public during COVID. At the outset of the first lockdown, we received feedback that highlighted the need to ensure the circumstances of diverse and vulnerable people were considered when engaging individuals about social distancing and bringing empathy to interactions So we were able to quickly feed this into our daily operational briefings. We were also able to adapt our communications, again, quite early on in the pandemic, based on what the public wanted to know from the police about the restrictions on staying safe in their local area. So we were able to tailor that to meet local needs. We also proactively engaged local communities with tighter restrictions and outbreaks of COVID. The experience of Aberdeen helped to inform our approaches to policing other local reimposed lockdowns. And now moving on to the key findings. So this slide shows public confidence rates from April 2020 to April 2021. Confidence levels fluctuated month by month, as you can see on the graph. On average, it sits at 57% across the whole period, and this ranges between 53% and 62% across the local policing divisions in Scotland. Overall, confidence is higher than it was before COVID by 9 percentage points. It is also worth noting that around a third of respondents, when we asked them, do you have confidence in your local police, respond with don't know, rather than saying that they don't have confidence. So again, that's something that we're looking into in terms of engagement and raising awareness of police activity within local communities. A timeline analysis of events and the open-ended responses suggested that confidence was largely linked to external factors, particularly changes to COVID rates and First Minister announcements. And whenever there was a large gathering, we found that local events could often be felt nationally and quickly impacted confidence. And whenever there was a risk to COVID rates, we saw a decrease in confidence. So over time, we have seen peaks and troughs, but particularly as the pandemic has continued and we've had more lockdowns, we have generally tend to witness lockdown fatigue, which has affected confidence in police, but confidence in government across the UK generally. So the sentiment has changed during the last lockdown compared to the first lockdown. However, we are beginning to see a rise in confidence levels returning to above 50% again with most recent data. And the next slide summarises overall public opinion on the 4Es approach. And so this was the UK policing approach to managing the pandemic. And this included engagement, education, encouragement, and as a last resort, enforcement, involving a fixed penalty notice, depending on the severity of the breach. Respondents were asked whether they agree or disagree with the 4Es approach to policing the pandemic. 99% agreed with police engaging with people who are in public to establish individual circumstances and how quickly they can comply with the lockdown. 84% agreed with police explaining the risks to public health and the NHS in line with government guidance to people who are in public. 92% agreed with the police encouraging people to comply with the lockdown voluntarily. And 89% agreed with the police enforcing compliance when people are not willing to comply voluntarily. So throughout the pandemic, there has been overwhelming support for all the 4Es, but particularly with engage and encourage. And there's been slightly higher levels of agreement than educate and enforce. The next slide again shows overall public opinion on the policing approach. So our survey asked the same questions as the YouGov survey on the degree to which public supported the approach. And overall, 44% fully supported the approach by the police in Scotland. 38% felt that the police in Scotland should take tougher action. And we saw this increase with COVID rates. 9% said they support the approach by police. but felt that they were going too far in some cases, and 3% felt the police had no role in enforcing the lockdown whatsoever. 1% felt police were being too heavy-handed in enforcing the lockdown. So public opinion did tend to evolve quickly when COVID rates and/or restrictions began to increase, with most people saying that they wanted the police to take tougher action to ensure compliance. When COVID rates and restrictions changed, the public were less likely to say they wanted tougher action and returned to fully supporting the approach. The responsive nature of public opinion does present challenges to policing in striking that delicate balance between policing in a tough yet proportionate way. The next slide compares public confidence with actual experience of contacting the police during COVID. And as you can see from the 2 lines there is a clear disconnect between general public confidence in police and people's actual experience of contacting the police. While confidence has fluctuated during the pandemic and has been impacted by factors relating to COVID, public experience of policing has remained consistent, with overall satisfaction staying above 70% throughout the pandemic. And when we look at the next slide, so this slide compares user satisfaction with demand, with our call centre demand. So COVID has definitely had an impact on our demand on our contact centre, C3, particularly on 101 calls. While this has been unprecedented and fluctuated almost on a daily basis with government announcements and COVID rates, COVID breaches, satisfaction with overall user experience stayed stable. So as you can see there, it's well above 70%, and it looks like it dips, peaks and troughs a little bit, but actually, statistically speaking, that's a stable figure. What we're particularly proud of achieving during the pandemic is satisfaction with how callers felt treated by our call operators and our response and the attending response officers, and their needs being understood by our operational staff and officers. This has stayed really high at well over 80% throughout the pandemic. Where satisfaction dips is with our ability to keep people up to date, and this is an area that is being addressed in the implementation of our public contact strategy. The next slide shows confidence levels within diverse groups. And there are variations in confidence among subgroups, particularly the seldom heard communities. Our analysis shows this is influenced by deprivation and intersectionality, which we're keen to understand more about. This data tells us what people think, not necessarily why people think this way or why they might have less confidence than other people. So 52% of children and young people, LGBTQI, people living in most deprived areas, and people with a disability said they had confidence in Police Scotland, or the local police, sorry. 49% of Black, people of colour and people from minority white backgrounds had confidence. 47% of people from the transgender community said they had confidence. So as you can see, these scores are lower than the average for the whole sample, and this is what we really want to understand, the factors influencing this. The next slide shows user experience of contacting police within diverse communities. So when we compare confidence with user experience among diverse communities, we see a similar disconnect as the rest of the population, where actual experience is more positive than confidence. A distinction between confidence among those who have had recent contact with Police Scotland and those who have not. This only really strengthens the need for increased engagement to help to close that gap. Research data does suggest that there is a risk of some communities or groups within communities living with disadvantage who are not confident to contact and approach police based on their perceptions and possible experience. These are the groups we want to lean into as we design and develop our services. A different approach is needed, we think, maybe shifting from asking what people think to understanding their circumstances and fears. The next slide shows the drivers of confidence. So all the research we've looked at, including academic and our own engagement with communities, points to these 3 drivers of confidence and trust in policing. And these are police visibility, whether that's in the online, virtual and physical space, community engagement, so how are we keeping communities informed and engaged with policing activity and crime prevention, and our police values and behaviours, so how we show up and treat people, particularly in demonstrating fairness and respect and bringing empathy to interactions. And we know this can have a huge positive impact on a victim's recovery period, and we know how negative encounters with police, whether that's public initiated or police initiated, can really affect confidence and discourage a person from contacting the police again. So while outcomes are clearly important, our research shows the public place a lot of emphasis on the process and how they were engaged by police. Satisfaction, feeling of safety and perceptions of the police can be strongly linked to the way in which people feel listened to, understood and kept up to date. And the next slide is our focus for further research. And this is really based on enhancing our engagement to be supportive and appropriate to different people. We know our engagement activities are not reaching everyone, despite our best efforts so far. We are always engaging, and the quality of our interactions with the public is so important. How we do things matters, and the public are always reminding us of this. This work focuses really on the type of engagement we want to create with our core values and human rights at the heart of it, as well as making our contact methods accessible so that it is comfortable and reassuring for communities to contact and approach us regardless of their circumstances. And the next slide, which I'm sure some of you, if not most, have been waiting for, summarises our themes for further research. And these are centred around the drivers of confidence, reaching into seldom heard communities. And we really wish to gain a better understanding of, firstly, our understanding of seldom heard. We want you to help us to use the appropriate terms and language we should be using to describe, communicate and connect with communities. We also want to understand diversity within communities and the extent to which intersectionality comes into play. Our own research tells us that children and young people and people with disabilities from socially deprived areas have less confidence in police. And we don't know what we don't know. Do we have the right understanding even of who seldom heard communities are? The census data doesn't give us the complete makeup, and sometimes we do miss this in our demographic questions in our surveys, but we're keen to work with organisations to educate us and to tell us what language and terms we should be using in this respect. So we are keen to challenge our understanding. Secondly, we want to understand how important police visibility is to communities and what this looks like for different communities. We know not everyone wants to see a police car patrolling their area, but might like to access an officer in other ways, for example, discreetly in an online space, or have the opportunity to engage with officers at a community event. Well, we don't want to assume what works for different people, so we're wanting to really explore this area and find out from the communities themselves what is appropriate and supportive for them. So when and where is police visibility appropriate and reassuring to communities? Is the immediate presence of and access to an officer important? Feeling of safety, for example, when a serious crime has been committed in the area. So looking at the different contexts as well of police visibility. Thirdly, we want to gain a better understanding of how we can make our engagements accessible, inclusive and relevant to communities. We know surveys are not always the best way of doing this, and perhaps we need to take a more qualitative approach to connect with and understand the lived experiences of communities in a more participatory way. That is action-based and in line with the Christie Commission principles. And the fourth area is focused on our values and behaviours. So how do we apply our values and behaviours for different communities in demonstrating that fairness and respect during interactions and community engagement? We know how we show up and treat people really matters, and this might sound obvious, but we need to always ensure that we're doing this and understanding what this means to different communities. So we are showing up in the best way and in the most supportive ways that respect circumstances, cultures and sensitivities. We know this is important. We know this was important to the deaf community and LGBTQI during the pandemic, and from this feedback, we were able to adapt our approach and awareness. The next on my final slide shows the key themes of our Seldom Heard engagement plan. The research we commission following this event will be used for practical implementation, supporting these 4 evidence-led themes we've identified for developing our engagement with seldom heard communities. And the aims of this plan is to embed inclusive engagement in our policy and practice across policing, equipping our people to lead positive engagement while working within communities, expanding our partnerships and networks, including grassroots organisations, doing engagement with partners to understand change in communities and to enable us to provide that multi-agency response. And very importantly, ensuring that we are using all evidence and community insights to increase our internal awareness and inform our policy and practice. This brings us to the end of the research evidence and emerging themes for enhancing our engagement with seldom heard communities. Thank you for listening, and happy to take questions at the end of the session. Over to the chair.
Davina, thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. I thought, and I know I'm not the only one when I look at the volume of, well, I see lots of clapping hands on the screen now, and I see the volume of questions and comments coming through the chat. So clearly lots of people find that really, really interesting. And I still find it incredible that 36,000 respondents took part in our survey, and I think that just speaks to how important this issue is and how important these questions are. And as I said at the outset, genuine credit to you and the team for the way in which you've dealt with that volume of data and analysed it and turned it into a usable product, which was shared with our 13 divisions and then made a difference in terms of deployment decisions in divisions and local communities right across the force very quickly. So thanks again, Davina, and a huge credit to you and the team. And I suppose again, just it strikes me really that, and I hope people listening understand what I said at the outset, there are many, many positives really in that data, and there's a lot of stuff we're really, really proud of as a service, but equally there are areas clearly that we can do better in, and I think we've got a much better understanding of what those areas and what those issues are now, and that is really where the audience comes in, and it's almost an over to you. We're really keen to get your help now to help us build our knowledge in and around those areas that Davina finished by highlighting. And I suppose it flows naturally then that I'll invite Dr. Megan ONeill back in. And Megan, you're just going to give a little bit more detail about how the grant and the award process will actually work. Over to you, Megan. Great,
thank you so much, John, and thank you, Davina, for that really interesting presentation. So these topics that Davina has outlined, this is what we're most interested in learning more about. So if we could move to the next slide, I'll give you some of the detail. So what we're looking for, related to those topics, is quite a variety of things. So it could be new research projects on those topics. It could be events that will bring key individuals together to share knowledge and understanding that perhaps already exists in these fields without additional research. Any other types of activities that will further knowledge exchange and help Police Scotland to develop its practice. We also are interested in things like literature reviews. If you're aware of existing research in this area that can be brought together in a concise way, that's all of interest to us as well. So we're not limiting the type of work that we will fund. New research is very, very welcome, but there's other avenues that could be explored as well. So in total, we have £50,000 available. So that comes from contributions from Police Scotland, the Scottish Police Authority, and from us at the Scottish Institute for Policing Research. So the three organisations have brought together this fund to use in this call. Within that, no one proposal can be worth more than £20,000, and that's quite a firm limit. We want to make sure that we're using the money in a variety of ways and not just on one singular project. So no bid will be funded that's more than £20,000. In terms of eligibility, again, we're very open. So people from or groups or teams from the public sector, private sector, and third sector are all welcome. We are especially interested in teams that cross sectors or bring individuals together from a variety of institutions. You know, co-production and collaboration is very important in this field. One thing we do have to stipulate, though, is that at least £20,000 worth of the funds will have to go to a group that's led by one of the Scottish universities that subscribes to SIPR. So SIPR, as I said earlier, is a consortium of 14 universities from across Scotland. So that's most of Scottish universities, not all of them. So because of the way SIPR works, we have to make sure that the money that comes from SIPR funds teams led by one of our universities. The rest of the funds we can be a bit more flexible in terms of how that's allocated. So if at all possible, it would be ideal if your team or your project group were led by one of SIPR's partner universities. But as I said, that's not an exclusive requirement for all of the money. So our proposals, the proposals that we're looking for need to be in by the 1st of July. And according in the digital age, we need to be very, very, very specific. So this is at 11:59 p.m. on the 1st of July is when the bids need to be in. One thing to flag and to make sure everyone is aware is if in the course of the work that you're doing, you will need access to Police Scotland's data, such as that which Davina outlined earlier, or other types of data that Police Scotland holds, you need to contact them prior to submitting your proposal to make sure that you will be able to have that access. So please don't assume that access would be given. You need to make contact with Police Scotland before your proposal is submitted, and ideally to contact them 2 weeks before, at the very least, 2 weeks before the deadline. All this information is provided in more detail in the information that we have online, and I will post that link just now. So that's now in the chat. So if you haven't already seen it, that's our website on SIPR that has all the information about the call, and all of these elements that I'm discussing are in there in more detail. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of the criteria, so these are the things that we're looking for. So when we assess the grant proposals that come in, this is what we're looking for. So we want to see the extent to which the proposed project or activity or event meets the knowledge gaps within how the police engage with seldom heard communities. So to what extent are we addressing what we don't know in this field? Secondly, we're looking at the suitability of the proposed team. So who's leading it, or who's the principal investigator? Who are the other investigators, or the other partners in that team? What are their experience and their expertise in this field of study? So we need to see a group that makes sense together to do that particular work. Thirdly, the feasibility. So in terms of what the project is aiming to do, or the event is aiming to do, and their ability to deliver that outcome, especially within the budget and within the time scale. And I'll go on to the time scales in a moment. So keeping in mind, if you're thinking about putting in a proposal, making sure that what you're proposing to do can realistically be done in the funds you've allocated or that you've indicated you need, and the time that we have in which to do it. So fourthly, we're also looking at innovation. To what extent is this a new area, demonstrating value for money? Is this a very credible work plan? To what extent is this sort of going beyond what we might normally expect to see, if possible? So how innovative is it? So fifthly, the potential benefits and impact. So we want to get a sense for how this project will leave a mark, leave a legacy, lead to future improvements and future development, that it isn't necessarily just a one-time thing, that there will be some lasting legacy to this work. And that's something we'll be thinking about as well. And then finally, we also are interested in the extent to which these projects or events will could lead on to other work. So could these perhaps be startup grants that will then lead to a bigger funding proposal down the road when the findings come in? So is there an opportunity to have additional knowledge exchange events that might come off the back of it, which we wouldn't necessarily fund, but we could help sort of lay the ground for that future work. So those are the key elements that we will be looking for when we assess the proposals that come through. Right, next slide. I'll talk to you about the dates. Right, so we're now on that second line there. So this is the event today, the 19th of May. And as we've mentioned, this event is being recorded, so that recording will be made available tomorrow. The deadline, as I mentioned, is the 1st of July for the submissions. So after that point, what happens is all the proposals will be sent to a panel of reviewers that we've pulled together. And so these reviewers come from some of SIPR's partner universities. We have representatives from Police Scotland, from the SPA, and so these reviewers will be looking at all the applications that have come in, and each application will be scored according to the criteria that I just outlined. The reviewers then return their comments to the award panel, and the award panel will review all the comments that have come back and the applications. The award panel will meet in that period in August, sort of mid to late August, and we will announce our decisions on the week of 2nd of September. So we would like projects to commence on the 30th of September of this year, so 30th September 2021, and complete within a calendar year, so be completed by 30th of September 2022. So this is sort of the time scale that we're looking at for the grants and the projects that are awarded. Okay, so that's all I have for now. So I will hand back to John, and I think at this point we will move towards taking questions.
Megan, thank you very much. And yes, I think that's a good idea. That's excuse me, the end of the front loading of the presentation part of our time together, and I think it would be good if we could start to explore some of the questions that have been placed in the chat bar. Now, I think Kat might be able to sort of share some of those questions with us. My temptation is if there are any other questions in and around the theme of the question that's posed, perhaps you could put your yellow hand up and we'll try and coordinate our discussion around themes. So Kat, could you perhaps kick us off with one of the questions, please?
Yeah, thanks, sir. Because not everybody's got access to the chat room, I'll go over some of the questions that have already been answered in the chat room, just so that everybody's got that information. So the first one was from Josh, just in relation to the £50,000, which obviously Dr. ONeill has covered in her presentation. The second one it's from Mary DeSantos, and she's asked, do you have set criteria for those applicants in the focus groups? So Kirsty Lewis Campbell has confirmed, yes, we design our research and determine criteria for those involved in groups as part of the design stage. At times we will consider a representative demographic of Scotland, or we may want to better understand key groups. So moving on to the next question. Josh has asked, would be interesting to know what participatory approaches have been used so far. So again, Kirsty Louise has confirmed we have started to look at participative approaches, but this is an area we are looking to develop as part of ongoing development work in Police Scotland. So I don't know if anybody wants to come in at that stage, if Kirsty Louise wants to come in. No, that's fine. I'll move on. So Claire Mail has asked, who does your team consist of, Davina? How large a team do you have? So our research and insights team has 4 professional colleagues at present, and we have a new post being advertised soon. And then the next question was from Ranjiv. Do you make use of any external surveying data from polling organisations such as YouGov? Don't know if Davina or Kirsty Louise, do you want to come in on that question?
Yeah, I can come in, Kat. Yes, during the pandemic, we looked at the YouGov omnibus survey for policing COVID, and we included some of the questions from that survey, which I included in the presentation today, around the public opinion approach to the 4 E's. We also look at the Scottish Crime and Justice Survey, and the SPA ran an omnibus survey as well during the pandemic, and we found that although we asked different questions, there were complementary surveys, and the confidence levels were similar at the times of the surveys being carried out. I see Amanda's got a hand up. Do you want to come in, Amanda?
Thanks, Davina. You've covered, obviously, the SPA did some polling work using ScotPulse. I'm just going to pop a link in the chat bar to the page on the SPA website where all that information is shared.
Thank you.
Can I come back to you then, Kat, please?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, sir. So next question was in relation from Kirsty McNeill. Was information on ethnicity collected? So Kirsty's confirmed, yes, we did collect the data for your police survey. And then the next question, the questions sound more like you're looking for an information on a geographical area rather than how police deal with people with diverse populations. That was from Ross Jackson. So we've confirmed, or Kirsty Louise confirmed, we'll look at all aspects, including diverse populations, but this is an area we want to continue to develop our approaches. Don't know if anybody wants to come in to discuss that at the moment. No, I'll move on. So the next one was from Paul Daly. So what was the feedback from trans communities that made the research more accessible? So Kirsty Louise has confirmed we had a range of feedback from these communities and would be happy to share in more detail. So that information is available. And then from Karen McCardle, I think it is, have you tried to do your value action research? Or have you tried or do you value action research? Sorry. So Kirsty Louise has confirmed we haven't, but it is something we are both interested in and looking at. So I don't know if anybody wants to discuss that further at the moment.
Thanks, Kat. Yeah, just to say that actually we were looking at action research in terms of a number of communities. So I think that would be a really interesting conversation to follow up. It is an area that we'd really like to engage with more as we work our way forward and develop a range of different approaches. So we'd really welcome a conversation, I think, on that in terms of how we could take it forward. Thank you.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
Kat, I was just going to say, I think there's a couple of folk, maybe Amanda, and then I think it's Marianne, maybe on the same point. Amanda?
Thank you, Chair. Just, I think, to confirm that the Joint Research and Evidence Forum, which is co-chaired by DCC Taylor and the SPA Chair, is also interested in action research. And I think Megan covered in her overview that we're really interested in some pragmatic and practical evidence and research as part of this exercise as well, starting to grow into that area, but definitely something we're all interested in exploring a bit further.
No, definitely. Thank you, Amanda. And Marianne, can I bring you in?
Yes, thank you. It was on the same note, I was wondering if you're going to take a nothing about us without us approach, and obviously action research is part of that, so that priorities for organisations that are led and controlled by people with protected characteristics themselves, rather than organisations speaking for us. And obviously that's a fundamental principle in reaching people that are seldom heard, is to enable them to speak for themselves, not have research done to them, but actually them conducting their own research with each other as peers. and that would be a way to actually garner support from seldom heard communities. As I said, it's a really, really fundamental principle that would actually help us to trust more if we're actually seen to be taking the lead in the research ourselves. And given that it's a very, very small pot of money, if we could have some assurance that that is the type of approach that you're going to take when selecting which organisations to fund, I'm sure other organisations would welcome, organisations controlled by people with protected characteristics would welcome that approach. Thanks.
No, Marianne, thanks. And I don't know if you could see the screen, but a number of folk came in to use their clapping yellow hands to support your contribution there. So here, thank you for that. And I think, Kat, perhaps I'll come back to you in case there's any other questions you haven't got through yet.
Thanks, sir. Yeah, there's quite a few. So a couple I'll just go through quite quickly. So we've got asked by Cheryl whether or not the slides will be available. Yes, they will be. They'll be shared on the link that Davina has provided, so that's available for everyone. Angela Harris has asked, can I ask whether visible difference is an area that has been looked at? Severe disfigurement currently sits with disability, but this does not apply to all our community. So yeah, thanks, Angela. This is not an area we have looked at yet, but would be really interested to engage further with you. So that's there. Do you see a difference in satisfaction agreement rates based on protected characteristics? So we will need to check the data with our team so we can share information on this. So that's from Will. So we'll get back to you regarding that data.
Excuse me, Kat, I see Monica's put her hand up. Monica, did you want to come in on that point?
No, sorry, I was just putting my hand up on behalf of one of the participants who isn't able to do it herself. So just when you're ready for a gap, I'll invite the person in.
Perfect. I'll come back to you, Monica. Kat, we'll finish with your questions, Kat, and then we'll open it up more broadly to see if there's any other questions from the floor.
Brilliant. Thanks, sir. So Kenneth has asked, averaging 70% or over satisfaction rate is excellent. What are the reasons given by the 25% for lack of confidence in the police? So Kirsty Louise has confirmed there's a range of different reasons that we review each month and respond with improvements where appropriate. We can pass on more information if helpful. I don't know if that's something that we want to discuss further at this stage.
I don't think so, Kat, but it's a point well made.
Next one from April. Have you looked at the attitudes or experiences of victims of domestic abuse and sexual violence? So we're adding these groups to our user satisfaction survey from next month. So this will be available in future reporting periods, and it is a really valuable area for our work. So that was from April. Will has then asked, have you seen any changes in your outcome rates and victim satisfaction rates for hate crime? So we don't have any information on this at present, but again, a very important area for us going forward. So we're looking at that as well. So there was a question from Yvonne, in what ways do you currently identify those individuals from a low socioeconomic background? So yep, we use the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation at present, so the data from there. And also, is it Cleo has asked, is disability broken down into subgroups? So unfortunately, we don't have this at present. I do have quite a lot more questions that have been on the chat. I don't know if it's worth continuing with that chat or whether we want to take some other discussion areas at this point, sir.
Well, no, thanks, Kat. And there's a number of people with their hands up, so we'll maybe take some questions from the floor. Then perhaps if there's anything in particular remaining in those questions, you could perhaps share those, Kat, afterwards. I suspect we'll maybe not get through everything, but so on the list of hands I've got, I'm going to come to Monica first and then to Trishna. So Monica, please.
Hi, so it's putting my hand up on behalf of Amanda Foster. So Amanda, if you're able to unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks very much for doing that, and apologies for keep coming in and out, but something seems to be happening to my Teams. But I am Amanda, and I'm a totally blind person, and I've been very interested in this. I'm going to try and cut a long story short, but I'm not quite sure how. But at the beginning of the pandemic, you know, we were getting told sort of about all the restrictions and the what you're not allowed to do and what you are. And I was just panicking. I was like, oh my God, because normally we don't get involved in the police very much, and we were panicking. And I didn't want to phone the police because I didn't want them to say, oh, well, you're not allowed to do this, whether it's going to impact difficult on your life. It's just going to be tough. You're just going to be arrested if you do it, kind of thing. This was kind of what I was kind of feeling. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I and a lot of other people weren't very confident in the police because, you know, things like guiding and helping with shopping or someone coming in reading your mail and this kind of stuff was sort of like kind of frowned upon, or car sharing, and it's stuff that blind people really have to do. And so the first lockdown was a bit of a nightmare because we just didn't know what was going to happen. In the second lockdown, we did have a few sort of focus groups, and that sort of led me to be a bit more confident with the police, because I found out that they were actually very, you know, they had empathy with what we were actually going through, and that they wouldn't arrest us. And then I found out about the 4 E's, which I really, really like. The thing of, but there is still some people that are frightened, terrified that if they do certain things, they will be arrested. So I just think that, you know, it would have been nice if we could have maybe had sort of some kind of discussion with the police at the beginning. I know it was difficult then because you were probably busy and there was a lot of stuff, but it's just made things a lot, really difficult for us. Apologies it's so long, but I just wanted to get it all in so that you understand what the situation is.
No, Amanda here, thank you very much. And in many ways you can't beat the personal story and personal experience. So thanks for sharing that with us. We'll take that on board, and I suppose it echoes my sort of overarching sense that there are some areas we can do better in, and I'm grateful for you for sharing that with us. So here, thank you. Now, I think Trishna is next. Trishna, can I come to you?
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'm the director of Seek Sanjog, which is the only Sikh family support charity in Scotland. And we've been involved in many consultations and things over the year. I found this very interesting, but the thing is that we would want to take part in this, but as a very small charity, it's very difficult. So we would value some support, or to be paired up with somebody that would be able to make sure that our voices are heard. Because we're into 4th, 5th generations of young people from the Sikh community in Scotland, and I still feel there's very, very little connection. I mean, we take part in consultations, but there's only so much that we can do as a small charity of, you know, circulating these kind of things, and it does need a concentrated effort. But I think it needs some, you know, some sort of partnership to ensure that it's not just a small minority of these voices. I mean, the Sikh community in Scotland is over about 10,000 spread across Scotland. And so there's pockets, you know, there's areas where people have a really good relationship with their police, and so you will get some feedback from that. And then there's other areas, and same as everybody else, people just have that vision of the police, and they're, you know, they're not happy, they're too scared to say anything, they won't speak. And there's incidents that happen that people don't talk about. So, you know, things like stalk search, that's something that we always see happening in England, but we know it happens here. We don't know if it happens here or what happens with young people. People don't discuss it, and it's never been discussed in a platform where all of this kind of research is going on, and it's really important that these voices are included in this. But if it's left to people like ourselves, are very small, because here we're trying to represent, but it's very difficult. So I would value some sort of partnership with somebody else to make sure that we're able to get these voices heard. And we have connections across Scotland, so we would be able to link in with people.
Trishna, thank you very much for that. And again, I don't know if you could see the screen, but a number of attendees were clapping their yellow hands in support for the points you were making there. So thank you. And you make a couple of important points from my point of view. I do think, you know, issues around stop and search, other issues across other parts of the United Kingdom, other parts of the world actually can have an impact on the confidence in policing in Scotland. That's the truth of the situation. So I think you're spot on in that regard. And your point about partnering is a really good one, and a sort of a very sensible one, particularly for smaller organisations. I don't know if any of my colleagues or anyone on the SIPR side might have anything to say about what could be done to try and, I suppose, partner up with Trishna's terminology, interested parties. Is there anything that comes to mind to anybody on the call that could be done? Perhaps there isn't, and we can take it offline. But if there is anything immediately that springs to mind, I'd be keen to bring colleagues in. No, I don't see. But Trishna, you raise a really valid point, and we'll certainly take that on board, and we'll endeavour to come back to you and give you an answer to that question. So thank you for that.
John, sorry, John, I was just going to say that Josh from the Scottish Community Safety Network has said that he'd like to link up with Trishna, so that's a start, but we can also take other things forward. Thank you.
No, thank you, Liz, and thank you, Josh. First class, thank you for that. Now the next person on my list is JW Participation. I'm sure that's not your Christian name, but do you want to come in, please, JW Participation? If you're there, JW Participation. No, maybe I'll come back to you. You've got your hand up. No, you've come off mute, JW Participation. Do you want to try again and maybe come in? I'm sorry, if you're speaking, I can't hear you. I'll maybe try and come back. Let me try then. Bob Farthing, I think, is next on the list. Bob?
Yes, thanks for a very interesting presentation for all of you. Quick question, looking ahead, how will the outcomes be communicated and implemented?
So, John, I think I can speak to that in the first instance.
Thank you, Megan.
Great, thanks. Bob, I think your question is in relation to, you're saying, so the outputs from any projects or any of the research that we fund. So at the bare minimum, we're looking for a final report from each team that we would post on the SIPR website, sort of as a baseline. Those reports, of course, would be circulated to Police Scotland and the Scottish Police Authority as well. But also, due to the wide range of activities that we're interested in funding, there may be additional outputs that are specific to that thing. So however appropriate, we will ensure, though, that when the projects come to completion and the work is pulled together, that the outcomes of that work are then shared with the relevant individuals in Police Scotland and the Scottish Police Authority, and then passed on to whoever else would be interested in those findings.
Yeah. I'm sort of assuming that there'll be an execution plan as a result.
So, and like taking forward the recommendations.
Yes, being a bit cynical, I've had some feedback saying it's not yet another academic research, but the reports get filed, something and nothing happens. It's how we get that confidence that something will happen. I'll
maybe come in. No, Megan, thanks for
apologies for being a little bit controversial there.
No, but Bob, kind of not at all. I mean, I suppose what perhaps I would say is, so I chair the Public Confidence Board, and every month report to the Chief Constable and the wider command team. We regularly report to our Scottish Police Authority on this matter. It's a matter of absolute top priority, and we've moved to commission this research because we want to implement its findings and to make a difference to improve confidence in the area. So here you've got my absolute commitment that it isn't well, it's applied research is what it is. It's research that will make a difference in terms of how we engage with communities across Scotland. So from an operational policing point of view, I hope that gives you some comfort and confidence.
Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you for your question. And Tina is next. Tina Yu, can I come to you, please?
Yeah, hi, I'm Tina Yu, work for Send Scotland, and for me, because it's a small grant, I'm just following on from Trishna's kind of point, but also like personally as well, I've been involved in a lot of kind of BME kind of stuff. There has been a lot of kind of rise in hate crime during COVID, and especially towards people of East Asian kind of heritage. And my concern is it's a small amount of money. A lot of community groups, I know in terms of Chinese organisations and things, I don't think they're very, very low capacity. So my kind of plea is, if there was a way, for if there was community groups that apply that are small pockets, but then they are linked into, like you said, you've got to partner up with a university, but not everybody knows who these are or have those kind of links. So maybe to encourage, more kind of different of these kind of seldom heard communities to apply, so it's kind of like action research. My kind of concern is about you're going to end up with 2 big universities applying for the research because they have the capacity, and you're going to end up with, what you want is variety, and but also encourage more kind of peer kind of researchers. But in order to do so, small organisations don't have that capacity. They don't actually know. So maybe there's a kind of, in terms of the grant system, maybe it's a different stages. So maybe you want an initial stage from volunteer organisations, from Seldom groups to kind of say, what, put your proposal in, what's your idea, and then if it gets looks kind of promising, then maybe it's the next stage to put in a more thorough application where you're linked into other research organisation things. Because I think it's going to be quite difficult for people to do so. And just a point in terms of, for BME, from my point of view, for a lot of Chinese communities, there's been, I think, when people do report to the police, the kind of response they sometimes get from police is apathy, or they're not taken seriously. So that further impacts. And I think with things like Black Lives Matters and COVID, with events that's happened, there's a lot of trauma. And I think with COVID, all of us has probably experienced a lot of trauma, but especially with BME groups, with things that's happening in the news and people who are shielding with disabilities. You haven't been out, so all you see is stuff that's happening in the media that kind of adds to the kind of I think there's perceived fear is quite high,
Tina, thank you for that. And again, your comments, if you weren't picking that up, received a number of rounds of applause from those on the call. A lot of people supporting your sort of points there. And I see Megan, you've come back up on screen, and I'm tempted to ask you, because I know that we're keen to hear and perhaps do what Liz and Josh did, kind of partner interested parties up as one of the strands of activity that can take place alongside the more academic research. But do you want to develop that a little bit, Megan?
Yeah, no, it was just to say that I mean, absolutely, as much as possible, we would want groups to partner up with each other, to, because as you're saying, it's a relatively small amount of money, and we probably won't be able to fund a large number of projects. So as much as possible for groups to collaborate would be ideal. I think it's a fantastic suggestion, and I think we need to think through what would be the best mechanism to do that. I mean, certainly on this call at the moment, we have representatives from various universities who will have heard which groups you're coming from and can reach out. I will speak to my colleagues in SIPR and see if we can develop a way to perhaps facilitate making those connections with the people who have registered for today's event. And if we can do so, then we will communicate with everyone what that mechanism is and how to access it.
Megan, that sounds fantastic. I think that again, reflecting on what we're hoping to achieve, I think that would be hugely powerful if we can do it. So thank you, and thanks to SIPR for endeavouring to take that on. And I think Dermot, can I come to you?
Hi, thank you very much, Chair. Thanks to everyone who has presented today. It's very interesting, and lots of facts and figures, which hopefully, if we get the slides through, can take a little bit more time and decipher a little bit. I'd just like to pass over a comment. It has been touched on by previous people who have spoken. I represent a lived experience recovery organisation based up here in Aberdeen, and we certainly have regular and constant engagement with many communities who could be deemed as being often not heard very well. a lot of disadvantaged communities, a lot of individuals who stay within the priority local locality areas, etc. The amount of input that we could garner from at least 6 different aspects of the people we engage with, although the money that's been provided is it's a large pot of money, I think it's being overstretched, and it may dilute the amount of information and the quality of the information that you get back. I'm also a little concerned that these kind of funding operations can often be grabbed by organisations in the centre where they have a bigger footfall and the population demographics are much bigger than we have, certainly up in the northeast, but even more so in the very northern parts of Scotland. But in saying that, if you don't get this kind of information from these other localities, I think you're getting, or you'd end up with a misinformed outcomes. You know, that Scotland's a small enough nation that it's important to get input from every area, not just those based in the central localities in the bigger cities. But in saying that, I applaud the efforts being made. Certainly for a more focused approach to be taken within certain areas, and then maybe being led by a larger organisation to take it down into separate localities in that area would be advisable, especially with the amount of money you're speaking about. I think it's a little bit of an ask there to make that cover the whole of Scotland. Thank you.
Dermot, thank you again. Some really great points there. And I suppose please be reassured that you know we understand our role as a service for all of Scotland, and again, certainly as the ACC for the north of Scotland, I'm really keen that the voices are heard from right across the country. So, you know, that's a point really well made. Thank you. Now, I see JW participation. Your yellow hand's still up and your microphone's off. Can I invite you again to try and come in?
Are you able to hear me?
I am indeed. I am. Over to you.
It could have been the camera was off because both microphone and camera are linked together, so perhaps that might have been the case. Yeah, my name's John Whitfield. I work for an organisation called Deaf Blind Scotland, and obviously the membership that we have are, you know, possibly deaf from birth becoming blind, or blind from birth becoming deaf, or it's a combination due to aging process. And I'm very much interested in how this survey was sent out, because obviously for a diverse membership that we have, many of they may require that information in so many different formats. You know, such things as moon, extra large print. I noticed throughout the conversation that a lot of reference to the deaf community, but obviously we have people who are deaf BSL use first, but when they lose their vision, they have to rely on tactile communication. And this is another format, whether if some of the police officers are aware of this, or how to approach somebody who is deaf blind. And this has been something been highlighted throughout the COVID and the pandemic, is the sheer isolation of people with sensory impairment as opposed to physical disabilities. People with sensory impairment have really struggled because of social distancing and things like that. The fact is, what formatting was used to contact people with a dual sensory loss?
John, thank you very much. I see Davina's hand is up. Davina will be best placed, I've no doubt, to answer that for you. Davina?
Thanks for raising that. So yeah, I mean, we're constantly seeking feedback on our methods and making it much more accessible. So yeah, we did early on. We had a BSL video and survey format, and that's something that we've kind of standardized for all of our surveys now, and as alongside an easy read version. But my team also do interviews over telephone, and some visually impaired people have asked us to do that. So we've carried out the survey questions and taken their feedback over telephone. We're also looking into options for providing different languages and just seeing how we can do that in the best way in citizen space. But that's just something that needs to be constantly evolved. So any suggestions that you have, or anywhere where we're not, if we're missing people out because of maybe the way we've raised a question, or not include or not acknowledge their circumstances in the demographic questions, because we know that that can make a difference as well in terms of enabling people to participate in our surveys. So that's part of the call for this research as well, really, is just to improve our understanding. So in terms of reaching people, we ask as many partner organisations and grassroots organisations to communicate the survey for us, and to advise us on the accessibility formats as well. But we know we're not reaching all of our partner organisations and the grassroots and smaller charities. So as part of the Seldom Heard engagement plan, which the Public Confidence Governance Board is accountable for, that's one of the key themes that we're looking at to develop in terms of expanding our reach, our partnership reach, and reach into the network. So we'd love to have you on board and part of that work. We appreciate as well that we're asking people to do work for us, sometimes often for free, but we'll try and keep that to a minimum. But any kind of advice and support you can give us on that is really welcome, and it'll be great for me if I can take your details and contact you in the future.
Absolutely. In fact, we've been working in conjunction with the BSL partnership, and part of our remit was to develop an inclusive toolkit for people with the dual sensory loss. So this may provide to be very useful to you.
Absolutely, yes, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, John, and Davina, thanks for the response. And in many ways, it's not dissimilar from Amanda's point earlier about how the policing engaging slightly differently completely changed the nature of the relationship and the confidence in her particular personal circumstances. So I suppose I would just build on Davina's answer there, and if there's any way in which we can improve what we're doing in terms of engaging right across those on the call, please let us know. Genuinely, we're all ears, and we want to make it as good as it can be for the communities that we serve. That's what this is all about. So no, thank you, John. Kat, I suppose I'll maybe just come back to you and see if there are any final questions you think are worthy of sharing more broadly from the chat bar.
Yes, sir, thank you. So just you've mentioned the Public Confidence Governance Board. So there's been a question about whether members of the public sit on that board and whether or not they're able to feed into the board with thoughts and views.
So yes, we don't have members of the public in that board. It's an interesting thought, kind of. I wouldn't mind hearing some of those views that the questioner is referring to. We have representation from right across our force. We have a member of the police authority. But if there are other thoughts and advice, I'd be very keen to hear that actually too. So perhaps, Kat, we could get the details of that questioner. I'd be keen to hear a bit more actually.
No, absolutely, sir. Do you want other questions, or is there anybody else?
We don't have any other hands coming up, Kat. I think we've probably got time for maybe 2 or 3 other questions from you to give a last chance if anybody wants to raise their hand to come in. So we'll take a couple more from you, Kat, and then that'll give an opportunity for any final questions from the floor.
No, ideal. Thank you, sir. So these are 2 questions. I'll probably pose them at the same time. So because they're linked. So the first question: what kind of training does Police Scotland offer at the moment to encourage cultural awareness among police officers? And then also, has there been any research conducted to understand whether there is correlation between the makeup of your force in terms of its representation and confidence levels among seldom heard communities?
So again, I don't know if any of my colleagues want to come in and to take that question on. If not, I can offer a view. So we have an array of training actually. We have a group chaired by the Deputy Chief Constable Designate, Deputy Chief Constable Fiona Taylor, looking at all aspects of equality, diversity and inclusion. And it's fair to say that there is a review and a refresh of that important work. So we have training in place, but we think we can make it better, and that work's been taken forward by our HR department, overseen by DCC Taylor and her group. I see Amanda. Maybe Amanda wants to come in on that point too. Amanda.
Thanks, Chair. I think as you said, there's a huge amount of work underway, and I think we need to be mindful that there's work underway that is led entirely by Police Scotland, but there's also a lot of direction from other oversight and governance bodies such as HMICS, and recommendations made on improvements or areas of work are taken forward in that way as well. And learning and development is something that they've looked at recently, and I'm aware there's a number of actions progressing, so it is an area of interest, particularly in relation to, I think there's been a few comments in the chat bar about hate crime, and I think it is definitely an area that's of interest at the moment and something that's been looked at in quite an amount of detail, and hopefully that's reassuring for participants on the call today.
Amanda, thank you very much. And Kat, we'll maybe take a final question from you then, and then we'll maybe start to draw things to a conclusion.
Oh, thanks, sir. There's quite a lot of comments in the chat in relation to bids, and also in relation to just pairing up and working together between different organisations. So one question, and we'll probably do this, is just in relation to whether or not everybody's happy to share their details, which obviously we can facilitate. So what I'll probably do is, just for everybody's information, is organise for confirmation from everybody that's on the call, whether or not we're able to share people's information, just so that we can get those links together with different organisations. So I'll do that. So that's one question that had been posed in the chat. I'm just researching, just going through if there's anything else that we've not covered. So there was one question in relation to how can we complete a genuine engagement with seldom heard communities when we do not collect the demographic data. When important crime, age, sex and race is collected but no other demographics, and we have no method of recording this data either. So we just clarified to identify what the we was, and the person was asking, meaning police. So it's being confirmed, yes, there are clear gaps in police data, but that is perhaps where research or work or other third sector, etc. organisations can come into the terms of understanding the views, experiences and needs of diverse groups. So I don't know if anybody wanted to pick up on that point.
I see, is it Ross? Ross, do you want to come in on that? Hi, Ross, I saw your hand up, perhaps in relation to that point, but I can't hear you.
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes.
Apologies, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, having Bluetooth problems there. My point in that is that we don't actually know, for example, looking at LGBT communities, we can't even tell how many LGBT people have been affected by crime, because we don't collect that data. So how do we compare the information?
So here, Ross, you raise a good point, which I suppose speaks to kind of some of the areas we're trying to improve. I wouldn't in any way sort of seek to pretend that we have everything right, far from it. I mean, I don't know whether, Davina, in terms of the data in particular, there's anything that you could offer at this point?
Yes, sorry, my icons are sticking. Yes, absolutely. So in our surveys, at least, we can drill down into those demographic groups. And just want to mention as well that we have over 100,000 open-ended comments to those 3 questions that will give us a richer insight into what people's concerns and fears are in their local areas, and also what they need from the police or what they'd like us to see us be doing more of. So my team are in the process of analysing all of that data. It's a slow process, but we want to do it right in a meaningful way. So we can split that data into all the demographic groups that I've presented today. We know that there'll probably be themes that cut across the groups as well. So we're keen to look at the intersectionality as well. So we're taking our time to do all of that. And I think it will probably be worthwhile us sharing the results, the key findings of that when complete, helps to inform some of the research going forward as well.
Davina, that is very helpful, thank you. And I'll give maybe the last question to Mark Hollinsworth. Mark, can I come to you?
Yes, sir, good afternoon. Thank you. It isn't actually a question. For those that don't know me, I'm a senior statistician for Police Scotland, and the topic of demographics we compile about individuals has been the subject of much discussion at our Data Standards Council. The challenge we have is, what can we ask individuals about that is appropriate for a policing purpose, and do we need to know that information for a policing purpose? So age and gender are relatively straightforward. Ethnicity is relatively straightforward, but when you get to the hard to reach groups and the not heard groups, it becomes more challenging to ask those questions for a policing purpose. If there are ways we could ask those questions, it would be good to feed that back to the Data Standards Council. It's something we could look at again, but at the moment we're constrained with what we need for policing purposes. Does that help, sir?
It definitely does, and again, it's clearly one of the issues that we can look at going forward. So here, thank you to Mark for that. Now, having said that was the last question, I see 2 other hands have come up, so I will take these 2 questions, but folks, we'll leave it after that. I'm afraid time is going to beat us. So I will come to Trishna in a moment or 2, but Sayantan, can I come to you first, please?
Can you hear me? Hello, hi.
Yes, indeed, yes.
Yes, okay. So I had a question about how do you differentiate the confidence in the police as distinct from confidence in other parts of government, Scottish government, and whether there is a difference in what is a hard to reach or seldom heard group from the perspective of the Scottish police and from the perspective of other parts of Scottish government, because, and if there are, then there could be potentially lessons that can be learned through that type of a difference.
No, great question, and I'm sorry, Davina, but you're a resident expert in this territory. Would you mind?
That's fine. I think that's a really good point, and we work closely with the Scottish Government Analytics and Justice team, who are great, and we basically learn from each other in terms of the terminologies that we use. It's a work in progress though, because the census data only tells us so much. It doesn't capture all of the communities and the communities within communities. So, I mean, this is part of the work, and the call for research is to help our understanding in terms of seldom heard and what that means. So that's something that we started to use, but we're not sure if that's the appropriate term for it, or if we're actually considering and acknowledging all the communities that we should be. So this is part of the discovery work, I think, as a next phase. But it is interesting to look at the confidence in government. So we've generally looked at UK level studies, particularly during the pandemic, and I'm not aware of any specific surveys that measure confidence in areas of the Scottish Government. Not to say that that isn't the case, but I haven't seen any.
Yeah, no, I mean, for example, I was just thinking about, if there are groups, say, from BAME communities or other areas where there may be a certain difference in their understanding of how the police interact with them as against other bits of Scottish Government. And if there are these differences, then what can the police learn in terms of how to manage that and learn from that and embed that in their practice. So I was just thinking, if there is some data on this, then that is potentially something to think about from a research perspective.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can look into that.
I think you're right. Very, very, very interesting. No, and it's interesting the difference between confidence more broadly and satisfaction, or the experience of those who've used our services, as Davina was outlining, being higher than the broader confidence. That's so really interesting. Amanda, before I come to Trishna, did you want to come in on that specific point?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just very briefly to say that I think it goes back to the point that's been made throughout the session about the value of action research, particularly in that area. I think we understand that confidence in policing might actually be confidence in another thing, or lack of confidence in policing might be lack of confidence in something more contextual, either at government or at another service provider level. And the only way we'll start to really understand that and think about how we make changes across the full system that would increase confidence is by getting into more of that action research that we've discussed.
Yeah, no, spot on, Amanda, and thanks for making that point. And Trishna, can I come to you for the final contribution, please?
Thank you. Just a couple of things on the person that spoke first about the ethnicity question, and when it gets to that, how difficult it comes. And that's where we've been running for 30 years now. We've been involved in many consultations and many projects and things that have come from Scottish Government, from Police Scotland or Lothian Borders Police before it was. And there are many things that have happened that have been really good practice, but they've never been embedded. They've always been a project or something that's done as a pilot, and then it disappears. Lots of really hard work on the ground. And the thing that works the most from our experience is actually linked with somebody. And it's the action research that is really important to get those kind of questions. And if you're linking in with the grassroots organisations on a longer term, then you will find that it's easier to get that kind of information. But if we continue down the route of these kind of consultations and surveys and questionnaires going out, and albeit people will send us to us and say, can you circulate them? But we can only circulate them to so many. These things need a long-term approach. Because if I look back 30 years ago to the Lothian Borders Police, and they had an equality diversity unit, and at that point in time we all thought this is the best thing since sliced bread and everything's going to change. And actually I look now and I'm thinking 30 years on, it's different names for different bodies. Some of them we've never heard of, but the questions are similar.
Yeah.
So that if there needs to be change, if change is to happen, then it needs to be done on a long term, so that it's just not a 1 year thing or a 2 year thing, and then off we go with our report. Where does the report go? Why is there not been any changes?
Yeah, I think we've been developing, it's finding a place for all the different types of methodologies and bringing it all together, which is what we're working on. I think over the last 2 years we've been enhancing survey approaches to make them practical for policing and working very closely, and that is a continuous journey. It has been good during the pandemic to see that the findings, particularly the qualitative feedback from communities, were reviewed by the Chief Constable and his operations review team every Monday morning, and that directly fed into operational briefings. So I think it's a good starting point, but now we want to get more into the space of, okay, so how can we make this kind of more meaningful and practical, very local, community focused.
Just as an example, in Scotland, there is no data on what the impact of COVID has been on the Sikh community. So we're a very small charity, but we took that on ourselves. So we've been running this survey since August to see what has the impact of COVID been on the Sikh community. And that there's minorities within minorities, and then the overall picture is the Asian community. But the Asian community consists of lots of different layers, similar to the white Scottish community. You can't, not one size fits all.
Absolutely. It would be really good if we could have access to that information and surveys that have been carried out locally as well, if that's possible.
The data, and once we have the report together, we're hoping to launch it at the Scottish Parliament once things have.
Excellent, that's great. That sounds like a really good piece of work.
Yeah.
And perhaps if you would be so kind as to share it with us after that, we'd be really keen to see that, Trishna. But here, no, thank you for that sort of final contribution, folks. We've been beaten by time. I just want to sort of say a couple of thank yous in drawing things together. So firstly, you have some contact details on the screen now. That there's a raft of supporting information that is available to everybody. That will give a bit more information on what you've heard. As you've heard, the slides will be available, and there's some detailed information about the application process. Lots of people have worked really hard to pull this together, but I think Inspector Kat Thompson and Monica Brogan from SIPR in particular deserve, if I could put the yellow clapping hands on the screen, I would. Thank you. They've done an awful lot of work behind the scenes in pulling this together. I'm hugely grateful to them and to everybody else who's been there. It's been a real team effort. Thanks again to the Police Authority and to SIPR for partnering with us in this endeavour. But most of all, genuinely, thanks to all the people who came and who thanks for your interest, for your attendance, for your contributions, for your advice. It means so much to us, and please rest assured we'll take that all on board. And I do hope more than anything that you're inspired to participate and to come to answer the call and to work with us. And I suppose I know, along with others on the call, we really look forward to receiving those applications. So thanks very much, everybody. It's been great to spend some time with you, and all the very best.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.